Life, for the most part, felt steady and predictable. Amanda and I had been married for 7 years, a span of time long enough to develop a comfortable rhythm, but not so long that the spark was completely gone. At least, that's what I told myself. Our life wasn't extraordinary by any means, but it was ours. We lived in a modest, 2-story home on the outskirts of Denver, with a well-kept lawn and a garden Amanda tended to religiously. Weekends were often spent running errands, catching a movie, or having dinner with family. Jason, my younger brother, was a regular fixture in our lives. He lived nearby, and since he wasn't married, he spent a lot of his free time at our place. Amanda adored Jason, or at least, that's what it seemed like. She often teased him about his single status, asking when he was going to settle down and give me a sister-in-law. Jason, ever the joker, would brush it off with some quip about how marriage wasn't for him. At the time, I found their dynamic endearing. Amanda had always been warm and welcoming, and Jason had a way of making people feel at ease. Looking back now, I wonder if I should have noticed the subtle shifts earlier. It started with Amanda being a little less affectionate, small things like fewer kisses before I left for work, or her being too tired for intimacy. I chalked it up to stress. Amanda had taken on extra hours at the clinic where she worked as a nurse, and I assumed it was wearing her down. Jason's visits also became more frequent. He'd always been around a lot, but now it seemed like he was over almost every other day. I didn't think much of it at first. He was my brother, after all. If anything, I was glad he felt comfortable enough to spend so much time with us. But then there were the oddities. The kind you can't quite put your finger on but make your gut twist in that uncomfortable way. Amanda started dressing differently. She'd always had a simple, laid-back style, but now she was wearing more makeup and tighter clothes, even when she wasn't going anywhere special. When I teased her about it, she brushed me off, saying she just wanted to feel good about herself. There were also the hushed phone calls. I'd walk into a room, and Amanda would quickly end a call or put her phone face down on the table. When I asked who she'd been talking to, she'd wave it off with vague answers. Just a coworker. Or, my mom. Jason, too, started acting strangely. He'd avoid eye contact when Amanda was around, and there was an awkwardness between them that hadn't been there before. Once, I walked into the living room to find them sitting on opposite ends of the couch, looking like they'd just been caught doing something they shouldn't. When I asked what was going on, they both laughed nervously and said they were arguing over a TV show. Despite these unsettling signs, I didn't let myself dwell on them. I trusted Amanda, and I trusted Jason. They were two of the most important people in my life. Why would I ever suspect them of anything sinister? But then, one night, everything changed. It was a Friday, and I'd come home from work a little earlier than usual. Amanda wasn't expecting me, and when I walked into the house, I heard her voice in the kitchen. She was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. I couldn't make out everything she was saying, but a few words stood out like jagged glass. I miss you too, can't wait until the next time. My heart sank. I froze in the hallway, straining to hear more. Amanda's voice was soft and intimate, the way she used to talk to me in the early days of our relationship. I stepped into the kitchen, and Amanda nearly dropped her phone. Her face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. Who were you talking to? I asked, keeping my voice as calm as I could. Oh, just Sarah from work, she stammered, quickly shoving her phone into her pocket. Really? Because it didn't sound like Sarah, I said, crossing my arms. Amanda's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. You're being paranoid, she said, forcing a laugh. I was just catching up with a friend. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But something about the way she looked at me, like a deer caught in headlights, made my stomach churn. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation in my head. Was I being paranoid? Or was there something Amanda wasn't telling me? The following week, I started paying closer attention. I noticed Amanda texting more often, always with a slight smile on her face. When I asked what was so funny, she'd shrug and say it was just a meme. Or something silly from work. Then there was Jason. He'd stopped coming over as much, and when he did, he seemed jumpy, like he was nervous about something. The breaking point came one afternoon when I overheard a conversation between Amanda and Jason. I was in the garage, working on my car, when I heard their voices through the open window. "We have to be more careful," Amanda whispered. "I know, but he's not suspicious, is he?" Jason replied. My blood ran cold. I didn't hear the rest of the conversation. I was too stunned to move. My mind raced, trying to piece together what I just heard. Could it be? Could the two people I trusted most be hiding something from me? For the first time, I allowed myself to entertain the possibility that my marriage wasn't as perfect as I thought. The seed of doubt planted in my mind during that overheard conversation quickly grew into a gnawing obsession. I tried to ignore it at first, convincing myself I was jumping to conclusions. But the more I thought about it, the harder it became to push the suspicions aside. I began paying attention to Amanda and Jason like never before. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It was a desperate need for answers. I told myself I wasn't looking for evidence of an affair. I was looking for proof that my fears were unfounded. I wanted to be wrong. The first thing I noticed was how Amanda's phone never left her side. She used to leave it lying around the house, on the kitchen counter, the coffee table, or even the bathroom sink. Now, it was always either in her hand or tucked away in her pocket. I tested her one night by asking to borrow it to look something up, and her reaction was immediate. "Why do you need my phone?" she asked, clutching it to her chest like it was a lifeline. "I just want to check something real quick." "My phone's dead," I lied. She hesitated, then handed it over with a forced smile. "Sure. Just don't go snooping through my stuff," she said, laughing as if she were joking. I didn't snoop, not then anyway. But her reaction told me more than I wanted to know. Jason, on the other hand, had gone from being overly familiar to strangely distant. He'd stopped dropping by unannounced, and when I invited him over, he always seemed to have an excuse. When I did see him, he avoided eye contact and barely spoke to Amanda. At least, not when I was around. The tipping point came a few weeks later. I was cleaning out the car when I found a crumpled receipt tucked between the seats. It was from a fancy restaurant downtown, the kind of place Amanda and I hadn't been to in years. The date on the receipt was a Wednesday, one of the nights she'd claimed to be working late. When I confronted her about it, she didn't even flinch. "Oh, that's from lunch with the girls," she said casually. "We had a little get-together last month." It was a plausible explanation, but something about the way she said it felt rehearsed. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the receipt. If she was lying about something as small as lunch, what else was she hiding? I decided to take things a step further. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but I felt like I didn't have a choice. I needed to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next day, I bought a small, discreet camera and installed it in the living room. It was hidden among the knickknacks on the bookshelf, perfectly positioned to capture everything that happened in the main part of the house. I hated myself for invading Amanda's privacy, but I told myself it was necessary. If I was wrong, I'd take the camera down and never speak of it again. But if I was right, well, I wasn't ready to think about that yet. The first few days were uneventful. Amanda spent most of her time in the kitchen or upstairs, and Jason didn't come over at all. I started to wonder if I'd overreacted, if I'd let my insecurities get the better of me. But then, on a Thursday afternoon, the camera caught something I couldn't ignore. I was at work when I got a notification on my phone. The camera had detected motion in the living room. Curious, I opened the app and watched the live feed. Jason was there. He was sitting on the couch, looking nervous. A few seconds later, Amanda walked into the frame. She sat down next to him, closer than she needed to, and they started talking. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but their body language told me everything I needed to know. Jason reached out and touched her hand. Amanda didn't pull away. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. This couldn't be happening. Not them. Not in my house. As I watched, Amanda leaned in and kissed him. The world around me seemed to shatter. My hands shook as I set my phone down, unable to watch anymore. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the walls were closing in around me. For the rest of the day, I was on autopilot. I went through the motions at work, plastering on a fake smile whenever someone spoke to me. But inside, I was falling apart. That night, I watched the footage again, this time from the beginning. I needed to see everything, to understand how far this had gone. The recording showed Amanda and Jason talking for nearly an hour. They laughed, touched each other, and shared more kisses than I could count. At one point, Jason pulled Amanda onto his lap, and she didn't resist. When it was over, I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This was more than just a fling. It was a full-blown affair. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, replaying the footage over and over, searching for some sign that it wasn't real, that I'd misunderstood what I was seeing. But there was no denying it. The evidence was right there in front of me. The woman I loved, the woman I'd vowed to spend my life with, was betraying me. And she was doing it with my own brother. I didn't confront them right away. I needed time to process everything, to figure out what my next move would be. But one thing was clear: my life would never be the same again. The footage from the hidden camera played in my mind on a relentless loop. Each stolen kiss, each touch, each laugh felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I spent days in a haze of anger, disbelief, and crushing heartbreak. But beneath the pain, a simmering resolve began to take shape. I needed to confront them. Amanda and Jason had taken something sacred and twisted it into something ugly. They'd turned my home into their playground, my trust into their secret. And now, it was time for them to face the consequences. I planned everything carefully. The confrontation couldn't be impulsive. I needed to be in control. On a quiet Friday evening, when I knew Amanda and Jason would both be at the house, I made my move. Amanda was in the kitchen, preparing dinner, when I walked in. She looked up and smiled, but there was something distant about it. "Hey, babe. How was work?" she asked, her tone light and casual. "Fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Jason coming over tonight?" Her hand froze mid-stir, just for a moment, before she resumed. I don't think so." "Why?" I shrugged, leaning against the counter. "Just curious. You two seem to be spending a lot of time together lately." Amanda glanced at me, her expression guarded. "He's your brother. Isn't that a good thing?" Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. "Speak of the devil," I muttered under my breath. Amanda shot me a quick look but didn't say anything as she went to answer the door. Moments later, Jason walked in, his usual confident stride replaced by something more tentative. "Hey, man," he said, avoiding my gaze. "Jason," I replied coolly. The tension in the room was palpable. Amanda tried to defuse it by setting the table and chatting about trivial things, but her voice was tight, and her hands shook ever so slightly. Jason fidgeted in his seat, his usual bravado nowhere to be found. I let the charade go on for a few minutes, watching them squirm, before I decided it was time. "Can we talk?" I said, my voice cutting through the forced small talk. Amanda froze, a serving spoon hovering over a bowl. Jason shifted uncomfortably. "Sure," Amanda said cautiously. "What's on your mind?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. With a few taps, I opened the footage from the hidden camera and placed the phone on the table. The silence was deafening as the video played. Amanda's face went pale, her eyes widening in horror. Jason's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. They both stared at the screen as their betrayal played out in vivid detail. When the video ended, I looked up and met their eyes. "So," I said, my voice low and steady, "care to explain?" Amanda burst into tears, her hands flying to her face. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "It wasn't supposed to happen." "Don't," I interrupted sharply. "Don't insult me with excuses." Jason, meanwhile, sat there in stunned silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was defensive. "Look, man, I didn't plan for this to happen. It just did. It just did," I repeated, my voice rising. "You didn't plan to betray your own brother? To sleep with my wife?" Jason had the audacity to look annoyed. "You don't understand, okay? It wasn't like we were trying to hurt you." "Stop," I snapped, slamming my hand on the table. "Just stop. Both of you." Amanda's sobs grew louder, but I ignored her. I turned my attention to Jason, who was now squirming in his seat. "You were supposed to be my brother," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You were supposed to have my back. And instead you do this? With her?" Jason's eyes flicked to Amanda, then back to me. "I'm sorry, okay? I don't know what else you want me to say. I don't want your apology," I said coldly. "I want you to get out of my house. Now." Jason hesitated, looking like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped him. He stood up, muttering under his breath, and left without another word. That left me alone with Amanda. She was still crying, her shoulders shaking as she tried to form coherent sentences. "I'm so sorry," she said again. "I love you. I didn't mean for this to happen. Please, we can fix this." "Fix this?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "How do you propose we fix this, Amanda? You slept with my brother. In our home. Do you even understand what you've done?" She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Please," she begged. "It was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right." I stared at her, my chest heaving with a mix of anger and heartbreak. "It didn't mean anything? You expect me to believe that? I watched the two of you. I saw the way you looked at each other. Don't stand there and tell me it didn't mean anything." Amanda crumbled, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of tears. "I was stupid," she whispered. "I was lonely, and Jason he was there. But it's you I love. It's always been you." Her words rang hollow, like an echo in an empty room. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this was just a terrible mistake, that we could somehow move past it. But the image of her and Jason together was burned into my mind, a permanent scar on whatever love we once had. "I can't do this," I said finally, my voice breaking. "I can't look at you and not see what you've done. I can't trust you anymore." Amanda looked up at me, her tear-streaked face filled with desperation. "Please don't do this," she begged. "Don't throw everything away." "I'm not the one who threw it away," I said quietly. "You did." With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving Amanda sobbing on the floor. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. The days following the confrontation were a blur. I felt like I was walking through a storm, battered by the emotional wreckage left behind. My once comfortable life had been torn apart, leaving me with nothing but anger, grief, and a growing determination to rebuild. Amanda's tearful pleas for forgiveness became a constant. She begged me to talk, to give her another chance, but I couldn't bring myself to look at her. Every time I did, I saw her betrayal, her lies, and Jason's smug face. It was unbearable. I moved out of the house 2 days after the confrontation. Staying there felt like a slow poison. The walls held too many memories, both good and bad, and the air felt heavy with betrayal. I packed my essentials into a few suitcases and left without saying a word to Amanda. I rented a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, a 1-bedroom unit with outdated furniture and a view of the parking lot, but it was mine. It was a place where I could start over, away from the shadows of my old life. Amanda called me constantly in the days that followed. Her messages were a mix of apologies, promises to change, and desperate attempts to explain herself. I didn't respond. One evening, she showed up at my apartment unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there, clutching a stack of papers and looking like she hadn't slept in days. "I filed these," she said, holding out the documents. I glanced at them and saw they were divorce papers. "I don't want this," she said, her voice trembling. But I know I can't force you to stay. If this is what you want, I'll sign them. I stared at her, torn between the love I once felt and the overwhelming pain of her betrayal. Finally, I nodded. It's what I want, I said quietly. Amanda's face crumpled, but she didn't argue. She handed me the papers and left without another word. The divorce process was grueling, not because of legal complications but because of the emotional toll. Each meeting with the lawyer, each form I signed, felt like another nail in the coffin of the life I'd built. But I knew it was necessary. Staying in that marriage would have been a slow death for my soul. Jason, meanwhile, had his own fallout to deal with. Word of his affair with Amanda spread through the family like wildfire. My parents were furious. They couldn't believe their son could do something so cruel, and they made their feelings known. Jason, what were you thinking? My mother demanded during a tense family meeting. I wasn't. Jason muttered, his usual confidence replaced by a sullen demeanor. It just happened. That's not an excuse. My father snapped. You betrayed your own brother. Do you have any idea what you've done to this family? Jason tried to defend himself, but his arguments fell flat. He was ostracized from family gatherings, and his once close relationships with our parents and siblings were left in shambles. His personal life didn't fare much better. He lost his job after his boss found out about the affair. Apparently, sleeping with your brother's wife isn't great for workplace reputation. He tried to salvage his relationship with Amanda, but their connection, built on lies and betrayal, quickly crumbled. Amanda, too, faced her own share of consequences. Without my financial support, she struggled to maintain the house. She tried to keep up appearances, but it wasn't long before she had to sell it. I heard through mutual friends that she moved into a small apartment and started working 2 jobs to make ends meet. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not really. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with them. As for me, I focused on rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I threw myself into my work, putting in long hours and taking on new responsibilities. My efforts paid off when I landed a promotion, a small victory in the midst of the chaos. I also started going to therapy. At first, I was skeptical, but it turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made. My therapist helped me process my emotions, untangle the web of pain and betrayal, and begin the journey toward healing. One of the hardest parts of moving on was letting go of the anger. For weeks, I fantasized about revenge, about making Amanda and Jason suffer the way they'd made me suffer. But over time, I realized that holding on to that anger only hurt me. Letting go didn't mean forgiving them. It didn't mean forgetting what they'd done. It meant choosing to focus on my own happiness instead of their misery. I reconnected with old friends, started new hobbies, and even went on a few dates. I wasn't ready for a serious relationship, but it felt good to remind myself that life could go on. By the time the divorce was finalized, I felt like a different person. I wasn't completely healed, far from it, but I was stronger, more resilient, and determined to build a better future for myself. Amanda and Jason had taken so much from me, but they hadn't broken me. As I signed the final divorce papers, I felt a sense of closure. This chapter of my life was over, and a new one was beginning. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. By the time the dust settled, Amanda and Jason were living the lives they'd chosen, though it was far from the fantasy they must have imagined. Karma had a way of finding its mark, and watching their downfall from a distance felt like poetic justice. After the divorce was finalized, Amanda tried to reach out a few times. Her messages were long, emotional pleas for understanding. She claimed she'd made a mistake, that she missed me, and that she still loved me. But I never responded. My silence was my answer. It wasn't long before I heard about Amanda's struggles through mutual friends. The sale of our house hadn't given her much financial cushion, and her lifestyle quickly crumbled. She moved into a small, run-down apartment on the edge of town and took up 2 jobs, one as a waitress and another as a cashier at a grocery store. She looked different the one time I ran into her by chance at a coffee shop. She was thinner, her face drawn with stress and exhaustion. When she saw me, her eyes widened, and she hesitated, as if she wanted to approach me. I turned and walked away before she could say anything. Her life wasn't just difficult financially. The relationship she'd thrown everything away for, her connection with Jason, fell apart in spectacular fashion. At first, they tried to make it work. I'm sure they told themselves that their love was worth the pain they'd caused, that they could somehow justify their actions if they stayed together. But cracks appeared quickly. Jason, always the opportunist, couldn't seem to resist the temptation of other women. Amanda caught him cheating with a coworker just a few months after they started officially dating. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Their breakup was messy. Amanda, already reeling from her losses, was devastated. She called Jason every name in the book and kicked him out of her apartment, but it didn't take long for her to regret it. She tried to win him back, but Jason had already moved on, leaving her alone to pick up the pieces. Jason didn't fare much better. After losing his job following the affair, he bounced between low-paying gigs, unable to hold down anything stable. His reputation as the guy who slept with his brother's wife followed him everywhere, making it hard for him to find work or even keep friends. Our parents had cut him off completely. My mom couldn't bear to look at him, and my dad's disappointment was palpable. Jason became the black sheep of the family, and even our extended relatives distanced themselves from him. He reached out to me once, months after the confrontation. It was a text message, short, awkward, and completely devoid of the arrogance he once carried. "Hey. I know I don't deserve it, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I screwed up, and I lost everything because of it. I hope someday you can forgive me." I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it without replying. Jason had made his bed, and now he had to lie in it. Meanwhile, my life was finally beginning to take shape. The promotion at work gave me financial stability and a renewed sense of purpose. I threw myself into my projects, earning the respect of my colleagues and even a few accolades along the way. I also made time for myself. I joined a gym, started hiking on weekends, and took up photography, a hobby I'd always been interested in but never had time for. Therapy continued to be a cornerstone of my recovery. My therapist encouraged me to focus on the things I could control and let go of the things I couldn't. It wasn't easy, but slowly, I found myself thinking less about Amanda and Jason and more about my own happiness. One of the biggest milestones came when I bought a new home. It wasn't as big or luxurious as the one I'd shared with Amanda, but it was mine. Decorating it was therapeutic, a way to put my stamp on a fresh start. As time went on, I began to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The final twist of karma came when I learned about Amanda and Jason's lives through a mutual friend. Amanda had started dating again but found it difficult to trust anyone. Her financial struggles continued, and she'd become estranged from many of her old friends. Jason, meanwhile, had moved out of state, hoping for a fresh start, but his reputation followed him. Hearing about their struggles didn't bring me joy. Not exactly. It wasn't satisfaction I felt, but rather a sense of justice. They'd made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. As for me, I thrived. I found happiness in small things: morning coffee on my new porch, the satisfaction of a successful project at work, the laughter of friends during a weekend barbecue. Eventually, I even began dating again. It wasn't easy to open my heart after everything I'd been through, but I met someone who made me want to try. Her name was Emily, and she was kind, patient, and understanding. She knew about my past but never let it define how she saw me. With Emily, I found something I thought I'd lost forever: hope. Looking back, the betrayal I endured was the hardest thing I'd ever faced. It shattered me, but it also forced me to rebuild. It taught me resilience, self-respect, and the value of true love and loyalty. Amanda and Jason's downfall was a testament to the choices they'd made, but my triumph was a testament to the strength I'd found within myself. In the end, I didn't just survive their betrayal, I rose above it. And as I stood on the porch of my new home, watching the sun set on a life I built from the ashes, I knew I was finally free. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the story. And subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.